Welcome back to the God Story. This week we are on chapter 2, the fall. In chapter 1 we read those 4 words, in the beginning God. 4 words that grounded us in a cosmic truth, that everything, identity, meaning, purpose flows from God. In chapter 1 of the God Story we met a creator who is not just powerful but relational. God exists as an eternal family of love, who created a world of breathtaking beauty and crowned it with humankind. Image bearers of divine love, invited into intimacy with God, one another, and creation. It was original glory. Not shame, not striving, just rest, relationship, and purpose. But in chapter 2, everything fractures. The story takes a dark turn, and 6 new words usher in the shift. Now the serpent was more crafty. From this point forward, the God story becomes a contested narrative. Evil has entered the scene, and it has an identity. The serpent isn't a mythological leftover or a symbolic force. Scripture invites us to understand evil as personal and intelligent. Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 give us glimpses of a heavenly being, radiant and wise, who fell through pride and rebellion, pointing to a spiritual adversary. Much later, Revelation 12:9 and Revelation 22 explicitly identify the serpent in Eden as Satan, the ancient deceiver who has opposed God's purposes from the beginning. The ancient deceiver. Now, the Bible doesn't give us a full biography of Satan, but the glimpses we do get are sobering. He's not a cartoon villain. He's subtle, strategic, a master of distortion. He doesn't need to shout to be effective. Often his voice sounds so close to the truth, but just off enough to shift the whole story. And that's exactly what he does in Eden. The serpent is described as crafty. The Hebrew word used here is arum, which carries the idea of a negative use of intelligence or a perversion of wisdom. It's not portrayed as a chaotic villain, but rather a nefarious imposter, corrupting and twisting truth. The strategy he uses is not to scare us, but to seduce us into mistrusting God. He starts subtly. Did God really say? He sows doubt, not just about the words of God, but the heart behind them. And then he escalates. You will certainly not die, the serpent says. God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. It's insidious because Adam and Eve already were like God. They were made in his image. But the serpent reframes obedience as oppression. He suggests God is holding out on them, that to be truly fulfilled, they must define life on their terms. And this is what the 2 trees in the garden symbolize. The tree of life is God's invitation to live in trusting, dependent union with him, daily receiving life and meaning from divine love. But the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Well, that's the temptation to go it alone. It's not about intellectual knowledge. It's about moral autonomy. It's the attempt to define and experience good and evil apart from God. It's using your own independence to determine what is good and what is evil, rather than how God defines it. Now, God's warning wasn't arbitrary. It was parental and corrective, like a loving father drawing a boundary around a fireplace. Stay close to the warmth, but don't step into the flames. Back in chapter 1, we read a quote by Tozer, and he said, "What comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you." And I think the serpent knew that. So he attacked Eve's perception of God. And he continues to do that to us today. he reframes God's words in a deceitful way. He says, did God say you can't eat from any tree? Now that's not what God said, but now the image bearers are unsure. If God can't be trusted, who can? Maybe God's withholding, maybe they need to take matters into their own hands. And that's exactly what they do. They eat. And in that moment, the glory cracks. Shame enters, they cover themselves. Fear follows and they hide. Their once open souls shrink back into insecurity. And then God arrives. Not with rage, but with a question. Where are you? This is one of the most heart-wrenching moments in all of Scripture. The voice of the Creator searching for his beloved ones. Not because he doesn't know where they are, but because they don't. This is the voice of relentless love, of a God who can't stand the distance, who comes looking even when he's been rejected. The God story tells us that the plot line may now be convulsing with consequences, but God is already moving toward reconciliation. Still, the damage is real. Adam says, I was afraid, so I hid. And then comes the great unraveling. Blame. Adam says, the woman you put here with me made me do it. The woman says, the serpent deceived me. No one owns it. Everyone deflects. This is the birth of the blame game, humanity's desperate attempt to escape the unbearable feeling of not being enough. When shame enters, we instinctively self-protect. We point fingers, we rewrite the story to protect ourselves from the pain of responsibility. And these patterns have never stopped. They're baked into politics, family systems, even church culture. Shame, fear, and blame. Together they drive wedges between us and God, and between each other. And the consequences of this go deep. The relationship between humans and God is fractured. The intimacy of Eden is lost. The relationship between man and woman is disrupted. Mutuality is replaced with domination. The relationship with creation is strained. Work becomes toil. Life becomes struggle. And worst of all, death enters the story. God sees it all. And he knows when humans choose to redefine good and evil for themselves, they have the potential to themselves become beastly, capable of horror, violence, and deep self-destruction. So Adam and Eve are sent out of Eden, away from the tree of life, away from the home they were made for. But here is the astonishing thing. Even as the world fractures, grace leaks in. First, God spares their lives. They don't die on the spot. Despite the cosmic betrayal, God preserves them. That's mercy. Secondly, and I've missed this so many times when I've been reading it, but God covers them. They tried to hide with fig leaves, thin, temporary shame coverings. But God makes garments for them. He clothes them himself. He doesn't shame them for their shame. He meets it with tenderness. He steps in and basically says, you can't cover yourselves, but I will. And then third, he speaks a promise. To the serpent, he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and her offspring will crush your head. This is the first whisper of the gospel. A descendant is coming. The serpent won't win. Evil will not have the final word. Even at these opening stages, God is already planning redemption. This moment doesn't just show us judgment. It shows us the aching heart of a father who refuses to abandon his children. A God who, even in exile, goes with them. And that hopeful thread carries forward through Cain and Abel, through cities and floods, through brokenness and rebuilding. God keeps reaching. Even when Cain murders his brother, God marks him, not for punishment, but for protection. And though humanity keeps moving east, further from Eden, God keeps chasing them. God is relentless in his love for them and for us. And then the flood in Genesis 6 might look like God's wrath, but underneath it is grief. The text brutally tells us the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. The Hebrew word here, atzav, carries the weight of deep emotional pain. It's not rage, it's sorrow. God is not throwing a tantrum. He's a grieving parent watching his beloved creation collapse in on itself. Interestingly, that same root word, atzav, shows up earlier in Genesis 3:16, when God speaks of the sorrow that will now mark childbearing. It's not just about labour pains, it's about the relational and emotional heartache that comes with raising children in a broken world. These words aren't identical, but they both point to grief birthed from love. The world is breaking, and the Creator feels it in his heart. So when the flood comes, it's not just divine judgment, it's divine lament, a cry of love, not fury. And even then, grace still breaks through. When Noah steps off the ark, God makes a covenant. Never again. And he paints a rainbow in the sky, not just as a sign to us, but as a reminder to himself. It's like a wedding band across the heavens, a pledge that no matter how rebellious or broken creation becomes, God's love will outlast the storm. So yes, chapter 2 is a tragic turn in the story, but it's not the end. Because even in our hiding, God still asks, where are you? Do we know where we are? Even in our shame, God still clothes us. Even in our rebellion, he still comes looking. And even in exile, he's still preparing the way back home.